Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a profoundly intimate map, really, the map of your own inner experience.
That's right.
Our focus is on, well, the journey into self-integration. It's about accessing and healing those young, wounded parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
What one really powerful model calls the exiles.
Mm-hmm.
This deep dive is all about the process of unburdening, helping these younger versions of you release the old beliefs, the painful emotions they've been carrying, sometimes for years.
Yeah, for a long time.
And this isn't just about managing symptoms, right? It's about liberating your whole system, physiological, psychological, from the weight of the past. It's fundamental self-transformation.
It's a crucial distinction, I think. Liberation, not just management. And to guide us, we've pulled together a pretty powerful stack of sources. We're looking at classical psychoanalysis with Freud, some modern trauma research from folks like van der Kolk, neurobiology through the polyvagal theory, and practical behavioral science from James Clear and Kristen Neff.
A real mix.
Definitely. Our mission is kind of twofold. First, to really understand what these psychological burdens are. Where do they come from? In our history, our brain chemistry.
Sure.
And second, to identify the profound, whole person transformation that happens when we finally release them. We want to connect that abstract emotional pain directly to your physical reality.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basic language, the framework we need for this inner work. The sources all seem to emphasize the universal nature of psychological parts.
Right. It's not pathology.
No, it's just how our minds organize themselves. But what I found really revolutionary reading this is the idea that even the most extreme inner voices, the harsh critics, the compulsions, the self-sabotage stuff, they all have a positive intention deep down, a protective intention that they're just trying their best under really tough circumstances.
That reframing is absolutely the key. It unlocks the whole system. If you see your inner critic as an enemy, well, you just start an internal civil war.
Right, constant battle.
But if you approach it as, say, an overly zealous protector, then you can actually start to engage with it. And in this model, the parts that need the most protection are the exiles.
Okay.
These are the parts of you, often they feel like children inside, that got overwhelmed by pain or shame or terror way back when, and they had to be locked away.
Frozen, kind of.
Exactly. They're essentially frozen in past traumas, trapped in the emotional time when those extreme feelings felt necessary for survival.
And they carry this incredible weight. That's what the sources call burdens, right? I noticed the language here is very specific, almost mystical. It talks about extreme beliefs and emotions that parts carry in or on their bodies.
Yeah.
It sounds metaphorical, but what do the sources suggest is actually happening when a part is carrying something like worthlessness or terror?
Well, it's not just a metaphor. It's
Right.
trying to describe the somatic experience, the felt sense
Okay.
in the body. Right. When a part carries the burden of I'm fundamentally unworthy or the world is unsafe, that belief is literally held, you could say, imprinted on the nervous system, in the muscles.
Wow.
We see it show up as chronic tension, maybe specific pain patterns, even psychosomatic illnesses sometimes. For the part itself, the feeling is like being physically crushed or poisoned by that emotion.
So the emotion becomes a physical reality for that part.
Precisely. And the core insight here is that these burdens, the shame, the terror, the feeling of abandonment, they are not who the part inherently is. They're like emotional baggage picked up during trauma.
Right.
And these carried burdens are exactly what drive all the later conflicted reactive behavior in the system.
Which then leads to the mobilization of the rest of the system.
Yeah.
The internal security detail, the protectors.
Yeah, good way to put it.
So if the exiles are suffering under this weight of shame, the protectors have to work overtime to make sure that suffering is never ever felt again. Is that the idea?
That's exactly it. The level of extreme suffering carried by the exiles kind of necessitates extreme defense mechanisms.
Makes sense.
So these protectors can get forced into really intense roles, maybe egotistic roles like constantly chasing external validation, or hedonistic roles chasing fleeting pleasures to numb the pain, or even dissociative roles, just checking out of reality altogether.
Zoning out.
Yeah. And crucially, when these extreme protector roles are mobilized, they act like internal noise. They just drown out the softer, more sensitive, inherently loving parts of the system.
The parts we actually want more access to.
The parts that crave genuine intimacy, connection, creativity, play. The whole system gets stuck operating in survival mode, not flourishing mode.
So if the inner world is defined by these suffering exiles and these high alert protectors, where does the healing actually come from? The sources point to this concept of the self,
Ah, yes, the self.
this inherently undamaged, wise, healing essence that, thankfully, they say, resides at the core of every single person, no matter their trauma history.
The self is the ultimate resource. It is the blueprint for psychological health. And it's vital that, you listening know how to find this place within yourself, because the unburdening process has to happen from the self.
Okay, how do we find it?
The sources give us clear, practical, internal markers, almost like a little diagnostic checklist you can run through your day, especially when you feel triggered or overwhelmed.
Like what?
You can ask yourself, is my heart open or closed right now? Physically, emotionally? How much genuine compassion am I feeling? For myself? For others? Is my voice tone feeling constrained, or am I lacking energy?
And the moment you feel a departure from those qualities, like the heart closes up, compassion turns to judgment, clarity vanishes.
That's your signal?
That's a sign a protective part has jumped in and taken over, pulling you out of that self state.
Yes. The self is characterized by these qualities, often called the 8 C's and 5 P's.
Yeah.
Things like calmness, clarity, connection, compassion, courage, presence, patience. When we embody those qualities, then we can approach an exiled part without fear or judgment. And that moment, when a part truly senses and trusts the presence of the self, it's incredibly powerful.
What happens then?
People describe an immediate physical shift, like the heart literally feels like it opens, breathing deepens, the body relaxes, because that internal danger signal finally gets turned off.
Wow. Okay. So this all leads to the core objective, right? The unburdening of the exiles. How does that specific action fundamentally change the whole inner landscape we've just mapped out?
Well, when a self-led person approaches an exile, they don't try to fix it or judge it. They offer deep, compassionate listening. They essentially give the exile permission to finally release that extreme belief it's been carrying.
The burden.
The burden. And when that young, wounded part lets go of those decades-old beliefs, the shame, the worthlessness, whatever it is, it immediately removes the reason for the protectors to stay in their extreme defensive roles.
So they can relax too.
They're no longer needed for constant surveillance. This liberation leads to the transformation of the entire system. It allows those quieter parts, the ones that love intimacy, creativity, simple, spontaneous play, to finally emerge.
Making the person feel more integrated, more whole.
Exactly. The system moves from that constant vigilance to a state of fluid flexibility.
Okay, so that concept of carrying shame or worthlessness feels very personal, very internal. But to really grasp what a psychological burden is, the sources suggest we need to look beyond just personal history. There's collective weight, too.
Right. Freud offers a fascinating early framework for this. He linked burdens not just to individual trauma, but to the superego.
The inner critic's ancestor, maybe?
Kind of. That demanding internal authority figure that develops when we internalize the punitive aggressive energy from external authorities, parents, teachers, society itself.
And this creates a burden that's almost philosophical, ethical.
It really is. Freud showed the profound, often debilitating weight of this internalized authority. The sense of guilt that arises is especially tricky. It doesn't just come from bad things we actually did. The superego is so harsh, it inflicts guilt for impulses we merely intended, even just a fleeting aggressive thought.
Wow.
The moment this internal policeman is on the beat, the distinction between thinking it and doing it kind of loses its force. So the ego can be burdened with guilt for basic instinctual drives it simply cannot psychologically control.
It sounds like a psychological catch-22.
It really is. And the source material points out this massive, often impossible ethical dilemma built into the cultural superego.
Society's rules.
Yeah. Society issues these commandments, like the famous one, love thy neighbor as thyself. Ethically lofty, sure, but as the source argues, it completely fails to consider our actual psychological constitution. The sheer undeniable strength of our primal instinctual drives the id.
It assumes we have perfect control.
It assumes the human ego has absolute sovereign control over the deepest parts of the id, which Freud argued pretty rigorously is just a profound error.
So what's a modern example of this impossible demand?
Think about the cultural superego today. It demands hyperproductivity, constant social media connection and availability, the performance of perfect parenting.
Right.
All the time.
When a person inevitably fails to meet these superhuman internalized demands, and they always will, it provokes neurosis, deep unhappiness, guilt. The burden here is that constant crushing failure to meet an unattainable standard of perfection. It's psychologically impossible for an instinct-driven human.
That makes so much sense. Carrying that burden of constant societal failure must take immense energy, physical and mental.
Absolutely. And moving beyond this classical conflict, modern trauma research really highlights the physiological cost of trying to carry these burdens through constant repression.
You mean trying to keep it all down?
Exactly. Some people might look totally calm on the outside, quiet, highly controlled, but internally their bodies are, well, screaming.
What does that look like physiologically?
This is one of the most sobering findings, I think. That veneer of calm and repressors is completely belied by internal agitation. Their bodies literally seethe with physiological upsets. Like what, specifically?
Think. Racing heart, climbing blood pressure, elevated cortisol, sweating. All the physical signs of extreme anxiety and mobilization.
But they don't feel it.
Often, they remain consciously oblivious to this internal turmoil. The system is under chronic high alert, spending vast resources just managing the internal landscape, even if the conscious mind has successfully pushed down the emotional content. That physical mobilization is the burden being carried.
Wow. Okay, this leads us directly to how trauma memories, the ones that created the Exiles in the first place, are actually stored. You mentioned Vanderkolk.
Right. When a past trauma memory gets reactivated, the brain's ability to form a coherent narrative literally shuts down.
What part of the brain is involved there?
Primarily, the frontal lobe goes offline, as they say.
And the frontal lobe is crucial for...
It's critical. Language, executive function, organizing our sense of time, integrating raw sensory data into a story. This happened then, that happened next.
So when that shuts down during a flashback,
the emotional brain takes over. The trauma imprint isn't stored as a clear story. This happened to me on Tuesday in 1995. Instead, it's stored as raw, sensory, and emotional fragments.
like what?
Disembodied images, specific smells, loud sounds, intense physical sensations. It's fragmented, not narrative.
And if the frontal lobe is offline, what does that mean for something like standard talk therapy? Why isn't intellectual insight always enough for deep trauma?
It means you simply cannot reason your way out of a physiological response. If the person is still in it, meaning their nervous system is still reacting as if the trauma is happening, now they lack that coherent, objective narrative needed to get distance.
They can't process it logically.
They can't connect meaningfully with therapy because the very brain parts needed for reflective, analytical processing are just inaccessible. This is why the unburdening process must include somatic, bodily, and emotional release, not just intellectual understanding.
Got it. And linking that back to the physical self, Oliver Sacks's work provides such a vivid picture of how tightly connected the body is to the self. He talked about the body ego.
Yes, especially through his work with patients who lost proprioception.
That's the body's sense of where it is in space.
Exactly. And when that fundamental certainty is compromised, well, Sacks's descriptions are harrowing.
What did they feel like?
He described one patient feeling completely disembodied. She used the word piffed, like a frog in a lab experiment whose spinal cord is severed. Just disconnected.
Oh my God.
And Freud argued the body ego is the very foundation of the self. So if the body is our first anchor of identity, losing that organic mooring results in a profound deficiency in the egoistic sentiment of individuality.
A loss of the feeling of being an individual.
Right. The burden in this sense isn't just emotional or guilt-driven. It's the catastrophic loss of feeling like you exist in a solid, recognizable body.
It's the loss of the feeling of being. And the therapeutic path Sacks described is fascinating because the turning point wasn't always a medical fix, was it? It was often about discovery.
Yes, an intuitive, often metaphorical insight into the underlying problem.
Like the carpenter example.
Exactly. The patient who realized his body had lost its internal spirit level for balance. That metaphor suddenly illuminated the compromised internal mechanism for him. And that understanding paved the way for rehabilitation.
So whether it's the weight of the superego, or the chaos of trauma fragments, or this feeling of being disembodied.
Yeah. Section 2 really shows us these burdens are deeply interwoven into our physical, psychological, and even our narrative structures. It absolutely requires a holistic approach to unburdening.
Okay, so if the first two sections mapped the internal sources of these burdens, this section is really about the consequences, right? Where they show up.
Exactly. Because these internal burdens don't just stay neatly tucked away inside.
Yeah, they get exported.
That's a great word for it. They are inevitably exported onto our most intimate relationships, Our partners are supposed to be our secure base, our safe haven.
Right.
But when our inner worlds are unhealed, carrying these burdens, our partners can become completely demoralizing and debilitating.
This is where attachment theory comes in handy, I guess.
It's essential for understanding how this baggage from the past plays out right now, today. Unhealed exiles and those overactive protectors, they basically dictate how we engage with people we love.
Let's take an example. The anxious attachment style.
Right. Someone operating from this mindset lives in a constant danger zone, emotionally speaking.
Hyper alert.
Totally. They crave intimacy, desperately sometimes, but they are hypersensitized to even the tiniest perceived threats to closeness.
Like what kind of threats?
Oh, it could be a slow text response, a slight change in tone of voice, a delayed phone call, anything that might signal distance.
Yeah, because they're reacting from that protective, maybe even panicked place.
They often lack the skills to communicate that distress effectively. Instead of saying clearly, hey, I'm feeling anxious, I need some reassurance.
They might lash out.
Yeah, they launch into what the sources call acting out and drama. Maybe picking fights, getting needy, trying to force a response, which, ironically, usually pushes the partner further away.
Creating the very distance they fear.
Exactly. They feel like a tightrope walker without a net, just constantly performing these emotional gymnastics to keep their balance. And this pursuit behavior sets the stage perfectly for that notorious anxious avoidant trap.
Ah, yes, the push-pull dynamic.
Right. The anxious partner pursues closeness, their system buzzing with apprehension. The avoidant partner feeling uncomfortable with that intensity, maybe because their exiles fear being swallowed or controlled, responds with the deactivating strategies.
Okay, let's unpack those. What do these deactivating strategies actually look like in a relationship?
Well, they're basically intentional barriers designed to create psychological distance and reduce the feeling of intimacy.
So, concrete examples.
It could be overtly creating uncertainty about the future. I'm not sure where this is going. Avoiding labels. Let's just see how things go. Starting arguments right after a really close moment.
Sabotage, almost.
It can feel like it. Or keeping communication vague, slow. In more extreme cases, even belittling the anxious partner's emotional needs. The goal, conscious or not, is simple. Maintain emotional distance.
Which, of course, just pushes the anxious partner further into desperate protest behavior.
And you get that vicious cycle. One person pursuing, the other constantly putting up emotional walls. Both partners' exiled parts are basically driving the car, crashing into each other.
It's two unhealed systems creating total gridlock. So how do you repair this? Gottman's research emphasizes ownership, right?
Ownership and communication skills. When conflict inevitably arises, the key is shifting from destructive you statements. You always do this. You never listen. Which just attack.
To softer I statements.
Exactly. I notice I'm feeling anxious when X happens. I feel hurt when you say Y. I need Z right now. It's taking responsibility for your own activation, your own strategy.
Making no excuses, as the source says.
Right. And then making a clear, actionable request, not a demand, a request.
And Gottman also talks about perpetual issues, doesn't he? Things that maybe can't be fully solved.
Yes, this is huge. Many issues in long-term relationships, differences in personality, needs, lifestyle choices, they might never be completely solved.
So the goal isn't fixing.
The unburdening work here isn't trying to fix the problem. It's learning to move from gridlock to dialogue. Understanding and respecting the underlying dreams or needs that aren't being met by that perpetual issue. You essentially agree to live with the problem while making space for the needs it represents for both people.
Learning to manage it together instead of fighting it constantly.
Okay.
So if relationships are one arena where burdens get exported, then our individual behavior is another place they manifest, like in persistent traps.
Definitely. Alfred Adler talked about this through the concept of the guiding fiction.
Guiding fiction.
Yeah. It's the individual's fundamental attitude toward life. It's not determined by objective reality, but by their personal interpretation of their heredity environment, experiences what he called the bricks they build their life view with.
So it's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves and the world.
Precisely. And if that guiding fiction is misguided, maybe built on a belief like I must be powerful to be safe, or a deep fear like if I show vulnerability, I will be destroyed.
Then what?
Then it becomes the underlying source of failure and neurosis. The person relates to the world always, according to that interpretation, often setting limits on their life that are way narrower than they need to be. The fiction itself becomes the burden because it imposes rigidity, restricts possibility.
And Eric Bernays showed how these fictions play out socially, right? through
Yeah.
games.
Yes, his games people play. These are social interactions. Often they seem harmless, even high-minded on the surface, but they maintain an external facade while serving a deeper, internal, often destructive purpose.
Can you give an example?
The classic one is, look how hard I've tried. Let's say a part of a husband unconsciously wants out of the marriage, maybe because his exile believes intimacy leads to suffocation or danger.
But consciously.
Consciously, he insists he wants it to work. He might go to counseling, but he'll somehow miss appointments, get argumentative at key moments, subtly sabotage progress.
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. When the marriage inevitably fails, he's psychologically off the hook. His story is sincere. Look how hard I tried. It just wasn't possible. The game successfully kept his blameless facade intact while achieving his deeper, unacknowledged goal escape. It maintained the destructive guiding fiction that his real needs can't be met directly or safely.
Okay, so we've mapped the exiles, we've seen the roots of burdens and the superego and trauma, and how they infect relationships and behavior. Now, the critical part, the pathways to transformation. What can we actually do to help unburden these exiles and regain some internal sovereignty?
Right. Peter Levine's work is really central here. He argues that true healing isn't just symptom relief. It's about the system regaining its capacity for self-regulation.
What does that mean physiologically?
It's the physiological definition of unburdening. Transformation means a fundamental shift in our being, moving from those frozen trauma states of fear and immobility towards courage, fluidity, spontaneity.
And how does that happen?
It requires the discharge of that unresolved activation locked in the nervous system. The ultimate resolution of trauma, Levine says, doesn't actually rely on getting the memory perfectly accurate because, like we said, the frontal lobe was likely offline.
Right.
It relies on completing those thwarted survival instincts, finally allowing the body to, in a safe way, mobilize and finish the fight or flight response it had to suppress years ago.
Freeing up that stuck energy.
Exactly. That frees the organism to be flexible and spontaneous instead of stuck in rigid defensive patterns.
And central to this kind of somatic, body-based transformation is reclaiming our internal awareness. The polyvagal theory talks about interoception, right?
Yes. The ability to sense our internal bodily states, heart rate, breathing, gut feelings. It's described as a crucial sixth sense, directly linked to emotional regulation.
How does the polyvagal theory explain that link?
It gives us this beautiful neurological map of safety. We have the newer myelinated vagus nerve. You can think of it as the social engagement system or the vagal brake.
Okay.
This system regulates calmness and our ability to socially engage. It does this by coordinating the regulation of the heart, the lungs, and importantly, the muscles in our face and head.
So it affects our facial expressions.
Directly. When the system is active and healthy, we feel safe enough to connect. Our faces are expressive, engaging. But when the system is compromised by chronic threat or trauma, the ongoing burden, we lose that precise neural regulation to the face.
And the result is?
The result is often that flat, affective expression you see in some clinical disorders, or just a person who seems uncaring or emotionally absent in conversation. The system defaults back to the older, defensive fight-flight pathways because that social brake has been disabled by the perceived lack of safety.
So unburdening the trauma allows this social engagement system to come back online and regulate properly.
That's the goal, to restore that flexibility and capacity for safe connection.
Okay, moving from the physiological to the behavioral level, James Clear offers a really compelling framework for building a new, unburdened identity through small, consistent actions. He calls them identity-based habits.
Yeah, this is where we really bridge the gap between deep trauma work and practical daily action. Instead of focusing only on the outcome, I want to be rich, I want to be healthy, the idea is to focus on becoming the type of person you want to be.
How does that connect to unburdening and exile?
Well, the most powerful act of unburdening using habits is using them to consciously vote against the exile's core beliefs.
Okay, let's make that concrete. Say an exile carries the burden, I am fundamentally worthless and undeserving of care. How does doing like one push-up or reading for 1 minute challenge that?
It's an act of conscious self-reparenting, really.
Right.
Every single small action, 1 minute of reading, one push-up, even just making your bed, is literally casting votes for your new identity. That one push-up is a vote for, I am the type of person who values my body. That minute of reading is vote for, I am the type of person who is worthy of intellectual growth. You're systematically collecting evidence to contradict the exile's old painful belief.
And clear emphasizes consistency over quantity, right?
Absolutely. Doing less than you hoped is always better than doing nothing at all, because the continuity of the action reinforces the desired identity. It gradually, vote by vote, suffocates the burden of worthlessness.
And he also talks about making progress visible. Why is that important?
Because the system needs immediate satisfaction to sustain change. Using visible measures, a habit tracker on the wall, a food journal, a workout log provides clear evidence of your progress.
Like a little reward signal.
Exactly. This immediate visual feedback loop reinforces the behavior. It gives you a tangible sense of accomplishment that directly counteracts the negative feedback loop often generated by those old self-sabotaging protectors.
Okay, so these new habits build the strength needed to engage in another critical pathway, self-compassion. But the sources distinguish between two types, right? Tender and fierce.
Yes, this is Kristen Neff's work, primarily. We often hear about tender compassion, the soothing touch, reminding ourselves of our common humanity, being mindful of our pain without judgment. That's crucial. But to truly unburden ourselves, especially from burdens related to injustice or internalized oppression, we often need the strength to stand up to harm. We need fierce self-compassion.
What does that look like?
This is the action-oriented, strength-based energy. It sets clear boundaries. It stands up to external injustice. And most importantly for this deep dive, it stands up to internalized harm like the harsh inner critic.
And the sources mention as a specific challenge here, especially around gender roles.
Right. For those burdened by cultural expectations, particularly perhaps women influenced by traditional gender role socialization, which might emphasize tenderness over assertiveness, strengthening the sense of agency, that yang energy, the capacity for action, is often paramount.
Why is agency so vital for self-compassion to be effective?
Because without it, compassion can become passive acceptance or even self-pity. You can't effectively set boundaries, internally or externally, if a part of you believes you're not entitled to have them.
Makes sense.
People need to feel empowered to meet their own needs, to protect themselves, and to stand up to that internal critic that tells them their needs are selfish or wrong. Strengthening that sense of agency unlocks the full power of self-compassion, allowing you to both soothe the pain and take the action needed to prevent it from happening again or to change the situation.
Okay. And finally, we arrive at maybe the ultimate psychological act of unburdening, which seems to be about consciousness itself, controlling our perception.
Yes, this echoes Stoic philosophy, like Marcus Aurelius. The idea that events affect us only through our interpretations of them.
So if we can control our interpretations.
We fundamentally control our world, or at least our experience of it. The past is only burdensome because of the rigid narrative, the shame, the emotional baggage we've attached to the raw events.
It's the meaning we give it.
Exactly. So unburdening the exiles at this level requires actively challenging and rewriting those deeply ingrained, burdensome scripts.
Yeah.
The ones imposed by past experiences or those internalized authorities we talked about. It's a conscious move towards mental flexibility and spontaneity, rather than being rigidly stuck in a limiting fixed memory that keeps us confined. #outro. So this whole journey into the self, from compassionately mapping out these exiles and protectors to transforming our actual vagal tone, adopting new daily habits, it really isn't just about symptom relief, is it?
No, it feels much deeper than that.
It's a profound shift in our physiological and psychological existence. The liberation of these exiles, these young parts frozen in time, carrying all that old shame and terror, that's what allows the undamaged self to finally emerge more fully.
And that changes everything.
It transforms how we relate to our own bodies, to our partners, to the entire world around us.
And the core of all this work, it seems to me, is the power of choice. We have choices. The choice to adopt small new habits that start casting votes for a different identity. The choice to take ownership in relationships, to lead with "I feel" and "I need." And that gentle, courageous choice to actually turn towards and reparent the parts of ourselves that are stuck.
Beautifully put.
We're not just defined by our past, are we?
Mm-hmm.
We can be the architects of our own integration. That possibility of wholeness isn't just theoretical. It's built on these small, consistent acts of self-care and self-leadership.
Absolutely. And this leaves us with a final provocative thought, maybe something for you to mull over. It takes us back to Freud's thoughts on civilization and happiness. He noted that satisfying a wild instinctual impulse that has not been tamed by the ego brings this incomparably intense happiness, far beyond the tame pleasures of a controlled, civilized life.
But civilization restricts that, right?
Generally, yes. Leading to diminished pleasure overall, he argued. So the question is, if this process of unburdening exiles allows our internal protectors to finally transform, to relax their grip rather than just stifle everything,
Yeah.
what new, deeply satisfying, wild, instinctual impulse, maybe a part of you that loves freedom or spontaneity or intense creative expression, something long exiled by fear or shame? What impulse is waiting inside you, ready to be reclaimed and expressed in a healthy, integrated way?